Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. I always appreciate you. I'm Orlando Ruiz Jr. Welcome to another classic movie review. This is my review of one of my favorite police thrillers of all time, one of the greatest of all time, 1968's Bullitt. This movie stars the king of cool, Steve McQueen, one of the coolest movie stars that ever walked the planet. This man had a great run when he was making movies back in the day. One of the first things I ever saw him in was one of his first works, which was the original The Blob from 1958. And in that movie, he was supposed to be playing kind of like a teenage hero in that movie. Pretty young Steve McQueen, even though I don't think he was a teenager. He looked pretty old for a teenager in that one. But of course, he would go on to be in movies like Le Mans from 1971, the original The Magnificent Seven, the original The Thomas Crown Affair, 1968, also the same year as Bullitt. He was also in 1972's The Getaway, another great film, directed by the great Sam Peckinpah. Uh, he was also in The Towering Inferno, co-starring with Paul Newman. This movie was directed by British director Peter Yates, and the story is that Steve McQueen saw one of his films that he made in the United Kingdom and liked it so much that he personally chose him to come to the States and direct this film, Bullitt. And after this, Peter Yates would go on to direct movies like 1983's Kroll. I believe he also directed the 1977 film The Deep, starring Nick Nolte and Jacqueline Bisset, who was also in this film as well, in the role of Kathy. And he also directed, I believe, the 1989 Tom Selleck film An Innocent Man as well. And so, yeah, I like Peter Yates as a director, but Bullitt is definitely regarded as his greatest work. So, the basic plot of this movie centers around a Chicago gangster who betrays his associates over there and he comes to San Francisco to hide out. And there's a senator in the film, played by the very talented and handsome Robert Vaughn, playing the role of Senator Chalmers, who oddly enough plays a senator in The Towering Inferno, also co starring Steve McQueen. And I've always remembered him too from an episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show, classic sitcom, in which he played the long lost boyfriend of Mary Tyler Moore's character Laura in that show, who kind of resurfaces and makes Rob jealous and stuff. Always liked that episode. Robert Vaughn was very good in it. He was also good in Superman 3. For those of you that remember the classic Christopher Reeve Superman films, in the third one, he was the rich guy that basically hires Richard Pryor to do his evil bidding and, the main bad guy of that film. Vaughn's character, Senator Chalmers, has made some kind of arrangement with this gangster who is hiding out, and he's supposed to testify in court to kind of prove that the Chicago mob is actually a thing. And they assign none other than Detective Frank Bullitt to protect him and make sure that nothing happens to him in the meantime so that he can testify. And the man playing the police chief who assigns Bullitt to the case is actor Simon Oakland, who fans of Hitchcock films will remember as the guy who has that great speech at the end of Psycho, who tells everybody in the room about, uh, you know, the the big spoilery stuff. McQueen's character Bullitt and two other cops that he trusts put their witness in a hotel and have him safeguarded, and they're supposed to kind of watch him in shifts. And so the two cops that he trusts have the first watch while Bullitt goes home to get some rest and have a little quality time with his lady friend, played by Jacqueline Bisset in the role of Kathy. And Jacqueline Bisset is pretty good in the film. She doesn't have that much screen time, but the movie isn't about their romance or anything. Even though they do have a couple of nice moments together, she's kind of there just to show that he does have a personal life, basically, and that he's kind of a man's man and likes the ladies. Jacqueline Bisset was also in the 1977 film The Deep. She was also in the 1970s version of Murder on the Orient Express, and that movie has a hell of a cast, by the way. And she was also in the 1983 film Class, co-starring with Rob Lowe and Andrew McCarthy. Those are just a few films that I know her from. I haven't seen too many of her movies, but I really like her chemistry with Steve McQueen in this film. Feels very natural. And speaking of McQueen, everything he does in this movie feels very natural. He feels very real, and all his choices as an actor don't feel pushed or forced. They feel so in the moment and so genuine. And it really lends itself to the realism of the situation because it's the kind of movie where You see some of these situations in other movies, but because this came out in the late 60s, you really feel like this was something that paved the road for other things that would come along after this. Because this movie was shot on location and because of the caliber of acting in the film, there is a great sense of realism all throughout the film, especially in the moments when, in the early parts of the film, where you have the witness in the hotel and they're safeguarding him, and there's a knock at the door, and it's very suspicious because they get a phone call and they don't trust the phone call, so the policemen get ready, but the witness, his dumbass, unlocks the door like a moron, and gunmen bust through the door, shoot the cops, and witness gets shot. Why he unlocked that door, you're gonna be like, why would he do that? It's baffling to the viewer. But you keep watching, and slowly the plot kind of unravels a bit more, and there's a lot more to it than what's on the surface. Because Bullitt is super cool and tough as nails and a total badass, he doesn't care about Senator Chalmers and his stupid little threats about public crucifixion. He knows he has a job to do, and he's going to do it. Regardless of whether the witness may be dead or not, he decides he's going to take the body and puts him in a different place to hide him so that nobody knows what happened to the witness. And so he kind of tries to keep that little secret between just him and his police chief, who is like the only guy that he trusts. And pretty soon in the film, we get to a very exciting chase scene, one of the most iconic car chase scenes that happens about an hour and 5 minutes into the film. And this is a chase scene that feels very, very realistic in the way it was shot. And you can see it's McQueen behind the wheel in most of the shots whenever there's kind of a scene where you can see his face. It's very impressive because you see he's doing a lot of his own driving in the film. For action film fans out there that enjoy a good car chase scene, this is one for the ages. This is definitely one of the greatest car chases ever put on film. It is a 10-minute long sequence through the streets of San Francisco where they go as high as 110 miles an hour with all kinds of cars around them and people on the sidewalks and pretty dangerous stuff, but they really pull it off beautifully in the film. You don't see any, like in old school movies where you see like fake background, like blue screen background going by. It's real actors and real cars going at high speeds, and for a 1968 film, you can definitely tell that this paved the way for future Hollywood films to kind of follow in its footsteps in that way. And it's very, very impressive to watch. I think car lovers and car enthusiasts will definitely get a big kick out of this scene because it involves a 1968 Dodge Charger, black Dodge Charger, and when the scene starts out, they're following Bullitt in his 1968 dark green Ford GT Mustang, and he gets out of view of them, and all of a sudden they can't see where he's at, and before they know it, he's following them, and that's when the chase begins, and it's so freaking exciting. There's also a couple of very nice shoot 'em up scenes in the movie, one involving Bullitt and a bad guy on the tarmac of an airport in Frisco with planes going by and everything. And yeah, just the way everything was shot really lends itself to the realism, whether you're watching a couple of people just talking or whether you're watching action happening. Because of the way this movie was shot and the way it was edited, you really feel like you're watching something that was way ahead of its time. In the way that it depicts all these things, even the scenes in a hospital where you have a character undergoing some type of life-threatening situation where they need surgery, and where you see a bunch of doctors and nurses in the scene. I understand they used real doctors and real nurses to achieve real like authenticity for these moments. And all of it really, really helps. As I'm talking about the hospital scenes in the film, I just remembered something that I wanted to mention. There is a moment in one of the hospital scenes where, after one of the surgeries involving, I think it's the mob guy witness who was shot, the surgery is finished, and the head doctor who performs the surgery, who's African American, is having a conversation with Steve McQueen in an office outside of the surgery room. And you see Robert Vaughn's character, Senator Chalmers, walk up and he's talking to the nurse right behind Steve McQueen and the doctor, the surgeon, and you can see them right behind the glass, like the door, glass door, and you can hear everything they're saying. And they basically overhear Chalmers talking to the nurse saying that he would like a more experienced doctor, and it comes off very, very racist. McQueen's character and the doctor kind of glance at each other and they look at each other, and just from the little looks that they give each other, you can tell that McQueen was uncomfortable in this moment and just a little awkward, and it's a very, very nice touch. And kudos to the filmmakers for putting that in this film because they didn't have to. They could have kept this a straightforward, you know, thriller action film, but that's one of the things that really lends itself to the realism. This movie was shot and released, after all, during the height of the civil rights movement. So again, props to Steve McQueen and director Peter Yates for having cinema reflect reality of the time. And speaking of McQueen, I gotta mention one of the great things about his character, Frank Bullitt, is that he kind of modeled it after a real detective, Inspector Dave Toshke, who was actually the man who investigated the Zodiac murders in San Francisco. Overall, this is not a typical action movie. This is not a generic cop movie. This is one of the best works of the 1960s. This is pure, unadulterated cinema at its best. As far as police thrillers goes, this is one of the greatest ever made, and one of the greatest films of all time. This is one of those movies that stays with you. It's very, very memorable because of all these great moments in the film, iconic moments, and an iconic performance by the king of cool, Steve McQueen, one of the greatest movie stars that ever lived. This is a 4-star film that I highly recommend. I believe you can find this on Max. As I'm always saying though, hard copies are out there, and maybe not much longer because they're phasing them out. So if you want to get yourself one, you can. This is my copy of Bullitt from 1968. Steve McQueen there with his uh, really cool looking holster that's kind of modeled after the way Inspector Dave Toshke had his holster, the man who was the investigator behind the Zodiac case in Frisco, as I mentioned before. And as you can see, there is a little bit of tease of that chase scene, as I mentioned earlier. Thank you all very much for watching this classic movie review. I very much appreciate it. If you're a new viewer and if you're into classic movies and if this is your kind of thing, hit that bell and subscribe. I'm always talking about classic movies on this channel. Every now and then, if I watch a new movie, if I feel like talking about it, I might talk about a new film, but for the most part, I'm strictly dedicated to talking about the movies that you just don't hear that many people talking about on YouTube or anywhere anymore. A lot of people just don't really care about the classics, and I'm not one of those people. I grew up with a lot of these old films. I grew up on Turner Classic Movies and American movie classics, and watched a lot of Nick at Night as a kid. So, I adore this era of films, whether it's the 50s or 60s, 30s or 40s, 70s or 80s. And, classic movies are the greatest in my opinion. And so I will continue to talk about the classics, and please be on the lookout for more classic movie reviews. If you're a returning viewer, thank you very much for your support. I always appreciate it. Please also don't forget to comment if you feel like it. If you want to share the video, I appreciate it because I'm sure that helps out the channel a little bit. And if you do like the video, leave a like. Thank you very much and appreciate you. Take care of each other and God bless.